Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, a bit of everything really. It's my wrap up for December. So we've reached the end of the year. I'm actually filming this a little bit early. I'm filming it on the 30th of December. So I might finish one more book before the end of the year, but we shall see. But I needed to get it filmed to keep the weekend free. So I'll talk to you about all the books I've read in December, and I will rank those in order from my least enjoyed to most enjoyed. And then I'll also let you know what's been on the channel in the last week or so and what's coming up in the next week. And also, I wanted to start by very quickly reflecting on 2022 as a reading year. So I am currently at 300 books read this year, which seems a lot, and is the most I've ever read in a year, certainly since I've been tracking it on Goodreads, and I think probably ever. My Goodreads total as of today actually stands at 299, but that's only because one of the books I read this month, which I'll talk about in a minute, isn't on Goodreads because it's not a book that's been published yet. So yes, 300 seems like a lot of books, and reflecting on the influence of the channel on my reading, I definitely think it's made me read more. Whether or not that's necessarily a good thing is another question, because I think it's steered me to read certain types of books, and maybe I've got away a little bit from just reading for fun, although I do still enjoy the vast majority of the books I read. My average, in case people are interested, my average page count, I think, for those 300 books was 252 pages. So that's kind of on the short side. 250 pages, to be honest with you, I think is a really good length for a novel. I think you can do most of what you need to in a novel in 250 pages. So clearly I've read some things that were shorter than that, some novellas and things like that, and some things that were longer. Including that Death Note book, which was 2,400 pages. So yeah, there's a range of stuff in there, but the average is about 250 pages. Anyway, let me talk to you about what I've read in December then. So there are 26 books to talk through. Had a bit of time off work, so I've got through a bit more in a month than I normally would. So let's start from the bottom then. So my least favourite book this month was this one, Strange Behaviour by Robert Hughes, which was a reread for me. I first read this when I was far too young, when I was a kid, and remember really enjoying it, but I think I enjoyed it just because it was so gruesome. So I don't know, there were some decent moments in it. So it's a novelisation of a movie, which is also known as Dead Kids. I did try watching the movie on Shudder as well, but just couldn't really get into it. It felt like a not terribly good, very early 80s slasher. So yeah, it's about a scientist who does experiments on kids or teenagers, which turns them into homicidal maniacs. So it's kind of a fun concept, and there were some enjoyable gore scenes in it, but overall nothing special. Next then we have another physical book. Sorry, I'm not very well prepared, am I? Another physical book, which is Anybody Home by Michael J. Seidlinger. So I did do a review of this on the channel. I thought it was an interesting book. I thought the style was interesting, but overall it just didn't hang together for me, which is why it's ranked so low. So a home invasion book, but told in effectively the second person, so you as the reader feel drawn into the events that are going on. But yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of this, I have to say. After that, a book which was difficult to rate. So there are two books that were difficult to rate this month, and maybe I should have talked about them first, but I'll talk about both of them now. So I did rate this one, and I gave it 2 stars, but I'm not sure that 2 stars is really a fair rating for it. So the book, or the story, it's a short story, is called A Puppet Scorned, and it's by an author called Jamie Kort. So A Puppet Scorned is an erotic horror short story about sock puppets. So it's quite a strange concept, and if that if the sound of that appeals to you, then it will give you everything you want from an erotic horror short story about sock puppets. But it wasn't really my kind of thing, if I'm honest. So I'm certainly glad I read it. It's only like 33 pages or something like that. So it was a quick read, and it was quite entertaining. But I never really felt transported by it, shall we say. So that has ranked fairly low, but I think that's more to do with my personal taste than with the quality of the book. The other book then, and this one I just couldn't give a star rating to because I just couldn't figure out what I thought about it. And again, I have done a review of this on the channel, and that book is the 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade. So watch that review if you want to hear more about my thoughts on the book. But an absolutely foul book, and yet it does have something. There's something about it that made me keep reading. Not a complete failure as a book, but certainly a deeply, deeply unpleasant book. Right, so moving on to easier to rate things. So next up then, we have The Painted Bride by Stephen Gallagher. So Stephen Gallagher's a British kind of crime and horror writer who was quite big in like the kind of 80s and 90s. This is a more recent book from him, so kind of a thriller about a woman who goes missing and her sister trying to figure out what's gone on. It just didn't surprise me in any way, I guess, was my problem with it. It was quite suspenseful and enjoyable, but what turns out to have happened is kind of what you imagine's happened all along. So in a way, I kind of didn't really see the point of it. Just above that, a horror novella, The Bucket List by Mark Towse and Chisto Healy. So an interestingly and enjoyably grotesque book about an old couple who run a bed and breakfast and are also cannibals. So about various people who stay there and what happens to them. So an enjoyable, silly horror novella. A fun, quick read, but nothing exceptional in my opinion anyway. Just above that, a bit of pulp. So The Story of the Phantom by Lee Falk. So the first of the Phantom novels. So the Phantom, I think, was originally a comic book character, but there were novels written in, I think, the 70s as well. So this was very much a book of two halves. So the first half of it, which is just all about the background to the Phantom and the fact there's been like 30 Phantoms before him and how the Phantom came about and stuff like that, I found a bit dull. But then when we get into the part where the new Phantom, who's a kid, gets sent to a boarding school in the States and starts to build his life over there, I actually really enjoyed it. It becomes really, really enjoyable. It leaves itself open nicely for the sequel, which I have as well. So I do need to read that at some point. So it ended up being really quite fun, but the beginning dragged a bit for me. Ahead of that, Ghoster by Jason Arnopp, who's a British horror author. So I really like Jason Arnopp's first novel, The Last Days of Jack Sparks. This is in a similar vein in that it's kind of a comic horror novel, so quite amusing at times, but it just felt a bit too long and it didn't quite hang together as well as I hoped it would. So it's about the kind of premise is brilliant. So this young woman has met a guy. He asks her to move in with him, so she's like relocating across the country to move in with him, but on the day of the move she just can't get hold of him at all, and it's all about the mystery of what's happened to him. So it had some interesting things to say about like social media and our addiction to cell phones or smartphones and things like that, but yeah, just didn't quite work for me, albeit it was very funny at times. So there were a lot of good things about it, but yeah, it wasn't quite perfect. Just ahead of that, Odd Thomas by Dinar Koontz. So I'm reading the whole Odd Thomas series. So Odd Thomas is, I personally think, a slightly annoying character. So he's a young man who lives in California who can see dead people and is has opinions about everything. And you do feel reading the book that what you're really reading are Dinar Koontz's opinions on everything, and I don't agree with his opinions on many things, and I always find it a bit intrusive when it's very obvious that the writer of a book is kind of preaching to you in a way. Even when I agree with what they're preaching, I find that a bit annoying, and it distracts and detracts from the story. But yeah, Dinar Koontz just has got so preachy in his old age, hasn't he? He's really quite annoying, in my opinion. Apologies if you're a big fan of his more recent work. But at the same time, it's a fun thriller with some interesting supernatural elements. So yeah, it was pretty good. Just ahead of that, then, we had the second book in the Odd Thomas series, Forever Odd, which I preferred to the first one because there was more kind of excitement in it. So yeah, I enjoyed that one a little bit more. Ahead of that, a horror novel from, I think, the early 80s, The Howling by Gary Brandner. So famously filmed by Joe Dante, I think. So a fun werewolf novel. Nothing exceptional or particularly surprising in it, but just a decent, well-crafted werewolf novel. Above that, another kind of creature feature, Thaw by Brian Dunn, which is about a group of kind of research people at I think it's the Antarctic, somewhere cold anyway, who discover a frozen like Iceman in the ice and thaw him out, which proves to be a stupid thing to have done, as you might imagine in a creature feature type novel. So it was entertaining. The characters were quite well done. It just wasn't quite violent enough, in my opinion. It could have done with more Monster on the Rampage type stuff. Above that, a book I've been meaning to read for ages, A Mission of Gravity by Hal Clement, the famous science fiction author. So I read this for Hal for the holidays, the event that Brandy from the Booklectic has been running, celebrating Hal Clement. I didn't enjoy this quite as much as I expected it to. So it's about like an expedition to this planet. The people on that expedition are from, or I say people, the creatures on that expedition are from a variety of different races or species, including a human. And it's just incredibly scientific. So Hal Clement is one of those people who was really good at coming up with like crazy scientific concepts for his sci-fi and weaving them into the story. And I just felt with this one a little bit overloaded by all the sciencey parts of it. There was some good kind of adventure story type stuff in it as well, but it didn't quite hang together for me. Right, moving on then, we have, and I forgot to say actually, I've taken part also this month in the Christmas Evil readathon, which was hosted by a bunch of different horror channels, which has been really fun. So a few of the horror books I've talked about have been based off prompts for that, and so indeed are a few more that are yet to come. So next up then we have an indie published book that I was sent, Red Ribbon Butcher by Jennifer Taylor. So I am planning to do a small press spotlight video soon. So if you've not seen those before, every so often I do a video where I just talk about some small press or independently published books that I've read, and do like short reviews of them. So I will talk about this in one of those videos soon. But this was an enjoyable kind of serial killer story, a short novel. I think it was about 140 pages, so kind of on the cusp between novella and novel. It was a little bit implausible at times. There was a kind of absence of any sort of hint of law enforcement, but it was still really suspenseful and enjoyable. So about a young woman who there's a serial killer operating in the area she lives in, who's called the Red Ribbon Butcher, who murders young women and leaves a red ribbon tied around their hair. And a new guy moves in next door to her, whose girlfriend was a victim of the killer. And it's about her trying to figure out if this guy is connected to the murders in some way. So it had some really good suspenseful moments. As I say, it didn't quite hang together perfectly, but it's still a really enjoyable suspenseful read. Just ahead of that, another book I read for the Christmas Evil readathon, Hex by Thomas Olde Heuvet, which is an interesting book. So it's got a great concept, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I hoped I would. It's a book I've had on my Kindle for ages, and I've been meaning to read for ages. So it's about a small town in the US that is haunted by a witch. So the townspeople killed a witch there, or someone they believe to be a witch there, like a few centuries ago, and that the ghost of that witch, which is has a physical form, haunts the town and just wanders around the town basically all the time. And so the town has created this kind of whole structure around the fact that they need to keep outsiders out for various reasons that become apparent, and make sure like people who don't know about the witch don't see the witch. And there's a load of kind of social media type stuff woven into that. So they have like an app that you can track the witch with and that kind of thing. So it was interesting. I thought the concept was great, but it kind of lost me halfway through. The end is quite good again. It picks up towards the end, but the middle part of it, I wasn't a huge fan of. And so overall, I gave it 3 stars rather than more than that. But an interesting concept. And what's interesting about it as well, I may do a full review of it, is that it was originally published in Dutch and set in Holland. And the author rewrote it effectively for the American market, so both translating it but also transporting it to America and effectively doing like a new version of it. So I found that quite interesting. It's a bit like the way that American studios remake like European and Asian horror movies. Anyway, continuing on. So the next book is the one that I can't put on Goodreads because it hasn't been published yet. So this is a romance novel that was sent to me by the author, who's someone I know through work. It's called Checked Out. So it's kind of a rom-com set in Edinburgh about a young woman who loses her job in the run-up to Christmas, and her trying to build a new life for herself, whilst also kind of going on a mission to right some wrongs that she's become aware of that are happening, and also a romance element. So it had a lot going on, and all 3 of those storylines were really entertaining. So I enjoyed it very much. It was a really fun read. Not the kind of thing I normally read, but yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. Just ahead of that, something completely different. We have Attack on Titan Volume 1 by Hajime Isayama. So this is the first volume of the very long-running Attack on Titan series. So I think it collects like the first 4 weekly instalments of it into one volume. So I enjoyed this a lot. So it's a post-apocalyptic type thing where these things called Titans, which are like huge humanoid figures, have devastated the earth, and the remaining people now live in kind of these walled cities. And it's about some young people in one of those cities kind of banding together and going on a mission to take out the Titans, I think. Basically, that's kind of what the setup feels like. So I enjoyed it a lot. Looking forward to reading more in the series. I've got all of them. I got them in a humble bundle a while ago. So yeah, looking forward to reading more of that series. Right, back to a physical book now. So again, a book that was sent to me by the author. So this was Mina and the Undead by Amy McCaw. A kind of YA vampire novel, which was a lot of fun, really fun. So set in New Orleans, got a great sense of place, about this young woman who's gone there to visit her sister, getting involved in kind of vampire goings on. There's a great backstory about her, like the sister's past, and their mother and things like that. So it just a nicely crafted horror novel. It didn't particularly feel YA, apart from the fact that the violence wasn't particularly graphic, and the protagonist was a teenager. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I had a really good time with it, and hoping at some point to read their sequel. The sequel's just recently been published, I think. Just above that, we have Clowns vs. Spiders by Jeff Strand, which was a very silly but very entertaining comedy horror novel about some clowns fighting some spiders, basically. What I really liked about it was the humour. So the humour is nicely handled, but also the clowns themselves. And there's this troupe of clowns who've been made redundant basically from the circus they work in, and end up working in this kind of haunted house place, which then gets attacked by killer spiders. So the clowns were just really nicely portrayed. It was a really nice kind of ensemble cast of different characters, and it just made the book a lot of fun to read. All the clowns had quite distinct characters. In some ways, I suppose they were reasonably two-dimensional, a bit like the Seven Dwarfs or something like that, but still a very enjoyable read. Just ahead of that, we have Button Uncanny Stories by Richard Matheson. So a reasonably short, it's like 200 pages, but they are quite widely spaced pages. short story collection by Richard Matheson. So this was very kindly sent to me by one of my subscribers, Kevin Judge. So I read this and another Matheson collection this month. So some really good stories in here. Button, which is the main, the title story, is brilliant, about this woman who gets given this mysterious package turns up at her house, which is this just mechanical button, and she's told if she pushes the button that someone somewhere in the world that she doesn't know will die, but she'll receive $50,000. And it explores the kind of, that kind of moral concept. So really interesting. I think I'm going to do a video on Matheson's short stories, so covering this and the other book I read, but a really good collection. Just ahead of that, a reread for me, Restaurant at the End of the Universe by Douglas Adams. So we read this for my birth year reading group. A lot of fun. Just a lovely, gentle comedy. Douglas Adams has got such a fantastic, or had such a fantastic imagination, and he is just, his books are just charming. I think, even though I'd read this book before and a lot of the jokes and concepts and things like that were completely familiar to me, I still really, really enjoyed it. So looking forward to reading the next one in the series. Just ahead of that, and I've done a review of this on the channel, which went up the other day, Uzumaki by Junji Ito, his 600-page horror novel about a town contaminated by spirals, which was incredibly weird. His art style is just fantastic. As I said in my review, it literally made me gasp at times. This book is shockingly weird, not disturbing necessarily, but just it has a real uncanniness to it, and I really, really enjoyed it. Ahead of that then, the final book in the Factory series by Derek Raymond. So again, I did a video about the whole Factory series this month. So this is Dead Man Upright. So I didn't like this quite as much as the first 4 books in the Factory series, but still a really good detective novel with a fantastic central character. Just above that, A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, which I've been meaning to do a review of, so I need to do a review video for this one, because I haven't yet. But a really interesting possession horror novel about a young girl who's possessed, or apparently possessed, by a demon, and the impacts of that on her family, set against the backdrop of the financial crash of the kind of 2000, the 2000s, 2008, I think. So yeah, set against that background. So interesting commentary on kind of American society and things like that, on reality TV, and just a really interesting, well-written horror novel as well, with loads of horror references woven into it as well. So yeah, very entertaining. Next up, the other Richard Matheson collection I read. So this is the best of Richard Matheson from the Penguin Classics range. So I ranked this one higher than the other collection just because it's got more stories in it, and I think a higher percentage of really good stories as well. So just some fantastic ones in here, including some that will be familiar to fans of The Twilight Zone, which Richard Matheson wrote a lot of episodes for. So Terror at 30,000 Feet, I think it's called, the one that was famously filmed with William Shatner, and in the Twilight Zone movie with John Lithgow, I think. So that's in here. Duel, which was adapted into a TV movie and was Spielberg's first full-length movie, that's in here as well. So some just brilliant stories. Richard Matheson is such a great writer of short fiction. This was an absolute delight to read. Okay, just ahead of that then, so we are nearly there. We've got 2 more books to go. So I just read this one yesterday. This is a strange book. So this is Story of the Eye by Georges Bataille. So this is I don't even know how to describe it. A classic work of erotic fiction, which is very strange, very disturbing. It gets increasingly disturbing as the book progresses. So really about 3 young people and their sexual relationships with each other and with other people, which get progressively more and more extreme as the story progresses. But a really quite fascinating book, really well written. This edition, the actual story is only like 70 odd pages. This edition also has 2 essays that discuss the story, one by Susan Sontag, which is really interesting, and one by Roland Barthes, which is also interesting. So this makes a really nice package, this Penguin Modern Classics edition, having the addition of those other, the essays about the book as well. I found really useful. I don't always read essays about books I've read, but in this case I was so intrigued by the story that I wanted to learn more about it, so I did read the essays, and overall I thought this was an excellent book. And then finally, my only 5-star read of the month, which is unusual for me. I normally have more than one, but Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which again I've done a review of on the channel. I think it's a fantastic book, an absolute classic, both of science fiction and of horror. Wonderfully atmospheric, really thoughtful. I read the 1818 version, and I talk about some of the differences, or my perception of the differences between that and the more commonly read 1831 edition in the review video I did. But yeah, just a great book, and one that I've read for this classics challenge that I'm doing, where I'm reading classics that were recommended by Michael K. Vaughan. Now, one of the other books I tried to read for that classics challenge is my one DNF of the month, and that's The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which is just one of those books that felt so meandering and slow and heavy, that I got a couple of 100 pages into it, I think, but I just couldn't face reading the several hundred pages I still had to go. So I had put that one aside. I may pick it up at some point in the future, but I'm certainly not intending to read it anytime soon. So yeah, that's one that just didn't work for me, I'm afraid. So that's what I have. That's what I have been reading. I've posted a TBR video for January, so if you have a look at that, you'll see what I'm going to be reading. In terms of channel stuff, then I'm not sure what's going to go up in the next week or so. I am going to be doing a video on how to read faster and better. So I did a video like that early last year. And a number of people in the comments have asked me, how I managed to read so many books. So I'm going to do like an updated version of that video. I will do a tag video in the coming week, but I'm not sure which one yet. And I will do a review, but again, I'm not sure what the review will be. I may do a review of Store of the Eye. And I may also do that Richard Matheson review that I talked about. So there'll definitely be some sort of review. I've also got a review video I filmed for the case I've got for my Kindle Scribe, which I keep on meaning to put up, but I haven't managed to find a slot for yet. So that'll be going up at some point too. So in terms of stuff that's gone up in the channel in the last week or so, so you've had my review of Uzumaki, the horror manga, which I just talked about, by Junji Ito. My review of the 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade. I did a tag about the influence of BookTube on my reading life, and I also did my 50 books I'm going to read before I'm 50 video. So yeah, look out for all of those if you've missed them. Okay, time for a random book from the shelves. I've got some sci-fi for you today. So a lovely science fiction novella, To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers, author of the Wayfarer series and more recently the Monk and Robot series. So I'm a huge fan of Becky Chambers. She's got a great imagination, but also you just feel like she gets the science of what she's writing about, but manages to weave that into her stories in a way that never overwhelms the story. So this is a wonderful book about kind of space exploration. I bought this copy for my dad, but never gave it to him because when it arrived in the post, I discovered it was signed. So I've rather rudely, perhaps, bought him a different copy and sent him that, and I've kept the signed copy. But yes, a great book if you haven't read it, and only short, so a quick read too. So I hope you found that interesting, and hope you've had as good a reading month as I did in December, and indeed that you've had a good reading year in 2022. Let me know what you've been reading this month in the comments. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.